Good evening. I'm David Gergen. I'm here with the faculty of the school and also the director of the Center for Public Leadership. And on behalf of both the school and the center, we want to welcome you all to what promises to be an exciting evening. Last year we had a chance to host this here at Kennedy School Gleitsman Awards, and they were one of the most spirited and inspiring evenings, I think, of the year. And having met the winners of this year's awards, I can say to you that their accomplishments certainly rival those of the winners last year, and we're so proud to have them here with us. I think many of you may already have met Alan Gleitsman. I was here with Sherry Roche. Alan began the program of the awards for citizen activists, for social activists, in 1989. In the early years, it was basically it recognized American activists. In 1995, we began recognizing grassroots activists overseas. And each year since then, the awards have varied, domestic to international. This year is the international. And I can tell you, Alan, as you come here, that we in the Kennedy School are proud to be partners with you in this. Alan and Sherry are among two of the judges of the wider group, the Board of Trustees, and we provide a place where they can come and we can have conversations and honor as these awardees should be honored. But sir, we are proud to be associated with you. We salute you for what you have done. And I think that we hear from these awardees tonight, and you see the extraordinary efforts they have made. You know, one of them is a graduate of this law school who decided to go straight and became a social activist, and has created a small firm of his own, 8 lawyers. And among them, over the years, they have helped farmers around the world acquire rights to land. Legal rights to land. 120 million farmers around the world owe their legal rights to this organization. Those farmers, their farms cover 10% of the arable land on the globe. Think of what a social activist can do and what can be accomplished at the level of an individual taking hold, coming out of a place like Cambridge and Imboden. And we have others who will hear. I won't steal all the thunder here, but we do have a special pleasure tonight, a special privilege, and that is that the former governor of this young commonwealth is here because he is a friend of Alan Gleitsman and supported what he's doing. He has to leave us in just a moment because Democrats are hurting their loins for a Democratic convention here in this state, and who better to help them get organized than the former governor, a man who's admired all over the state, indeed all over the country. So, if I might, I want to turn the podium over to him, and then perhaps he can introduce Alan Gleitsman. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Michael Dukakis.
Thank you. And I said this must be my week for the Gergen board, because on Friday I introduced David's brother Ken, who's a distinguished psychologist. More than that, he holds a chair in psychology at a little school called Swarthmore College, where I matriculated in 1951. So I introduced one brother, and I'm being introduced by another. It's great to be here. I'm a little confused, but I don't know who's doing the decorating around this place, because I left the faculty many years ago to return to the State House. But in case you haven't noticed, there's a kind of discordant note in these pictures behind me, and I won't say any more than that. I was trying to keep this as nonpartisan as I possibly can. I was thinking, Alvin, as I read the little bios of the folks we honor tonight, that it's a little embarrassing, and I say this really in a very nonpartisan way, to look at the kinds of domestic challenges we have in the United States. I mean, 44 million people without a dime of health insurance, the largest gap between rich and poor of any advanced industrialized nation in the world. And our apparent inability to deal with these problems, with the kind of wealth and the kind of knowledge that we have. And then to read about people working under conditions and with virtually no resources to speak of, and doing the kinds of things that our honorees do tonight. And I kind of asked myself, what the hell is the matter with us in this country? That we can't come to grips with these kinds of obvious domestic challenges. Not the least of which is the importance of a first-class, modern, national high-speed rail system. Just wanted to throw that in. After the vice chairman of the Amtrak board, but you get the point. And to see what four individuals have been able to do, one of whom I joined in having gone straight after having graduated from the local law school. I mean, there's something to be said for that, David. You know, going to Harvard Law School and then going straight and doing other things. And Alan, to say to you just how important it is that people like you honor these folks. I'm sure they don't crave this, they don't need it. I mean, as any of us know who've been in public service, there's nothing more fulfilling and satisfying, folks, than being in a position where you can make a difference in the lives of fellow citizens. And that's really why most of us go into this. But these contributions are just extraordinary under circumstances which we can't even imagine. And that's why it's so important that people like Alan take the time and the effort and put in their support and resources to honor these folks. The other reason I'm here is because every year that I teach at UCLA in the wintertime, and I do, it's a tough burden, but somebody's got to do it. You know, I teach here in Boston for 9 months, and Kitty and I drag ourselves out of New England right after Christmas. We don't come back at the end of March, and I teach at UCLA. We normally have at least a sandwich, right, every quarter, and unfortunately, because my mother was failing badly and recently passed away, as unfortunately did Kitty's dad, I wasn't able to keep my date with you. So I figured the least I could do was come over here and say hi to my friend Alan, and also to you. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I've got to hit and run, but there is a major Democratic event downtown, which I'm committed to being at. But it's just a great pleasure to present Alan to all of you and to say thanks to you for doing what you're doing, and to the honorees, a special thanks for really heroic efforts to improve the quality of life for people all over this planet of ours. Alan Gleitsman. Alan.
That's truly an honor to be introduced by a man who I so much admire. You're fortunate to have him here in your neighborhood. We only have lease of him for 3 months. We're very grateful to be presenting the Gleitsman Foundation International Activist Awards here this evening. And we much appreciate the help that you, David, and Holly, and Barbara, and particularly Scott Webster have given to us to enable us to be here this evening. Before I go any further, though, I'd like to introduce someone to you. That's Sherry Roche. Sherry, could you please stand? Sherry is Vice President of the Gleitsman Foundation, and a very essential part. And I'd also like to thank all of you for your interest. I think you will have a fascinating evening when you meet our honorees. The Gleitsman Foundation seeks to recognize activist achievement, and we hope to motivate others to become activists. Through our awards programs in the last 14 years, we've recognized more than 200 extraordinary people whose work is so inspirational, and I think you'll find that none more so than the four that you're going to meet here this evening. This year, we focused the award on those leading the struggle against poverty. I happen to be one of the many that feel that poverty is the preeminent moral and humanitarian challenge of our lifetime. Nearly half of the people in the world are forced to live on less than $2 per day. And it seems to me that it's unconscionable for us to be able to live in luxury while we know full well that 6 million children under the age of 5 will die this year and seem to die every year from hunger and malnutrition. And for those unconvinced by the moral arguments, I'd ask you to consider that although poverty does not cause terrorism, persistent poverty often does lead to hopelessness, hatred, and despair, and creates the breeding ground for the ideologues that spread terror. We must now recognize that we should not, and in fact we cannot, leave half of the world behind while we seek a better life for ourselves. This evening, we'll have the opportunity to hear from 4 extraordinary people who've been fighting for decades to enable others to lead better lives. As testament to the creativity of the human mind, particularly when coupled with the power of activism, all have taken different paths as they have struggled against the scourge of poverty. After the 1971 war that resulted in the creation of Bangladesh, as a matter of fact, while the war was still on, Fazle Abed returned home to his country to help in the war effort, and then determined to help in the fight against hunger and disease. In 1972, he founded the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, now known the world over as ROC. ROC has become the largest non-governmental organization in the world in the terms of the scale and the diversity of its interventions. Mobilizing the latent capabilities of the Bangladeshi people, in many fields, ROC has stepped in where the government has failed to act. To name just a few, ROC now provides microcredit loans to 3.5 million people, almost all of them women, while simultaneously running one of the largest private education systems in the world with 34,000 schools that educate 1,200,000 students. Amazing to contemplate. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce the 2003 International Activist honoree, Fazle Abed. To give the award, I called Maya Lin to ask that she create a sculpture for us. And actually she asked what the purpose of this was. I described it to her. It was her feeling that some people are able to see things more clearly, almost as if they're magnified. And that is the idea that she has embodied within this sculpture. So please.
Gleitsman, ladies and gentlemen. The Gleitsman Foundation has done me the great honor of bestowing upon me the 2003 Gleitsman International Activist Award. I take this as a recognition of what BRAC, the organization I founded, has achieved over the last 30 years. I accept this award with humility and thank the foundation for choosing me choosing to honor me. I share this honor with thousands of my co-workers whose commitment and hard work for the poor of Bangladesh has made BRAC what it is today. Bangladesh's War of Independence in 1971 was a traumatic experience for our people. 10 million Bangladeshis left the country for neighboring India to escape the ravages and brutalities of war. This drew thousands of freedom fighters into the liberation struggle. At that time, being an executive in a multinational corporation, I felt impelled to join our liberation struggle. Fortunately, this struggle did not have to last long, and Bangladesh became independent in December 1971. The war-ravaged country needed our services, and I felt unable to return to the life of a corporate executive. In response to the humanitarian needs of Bangladesh, I decided to set up BRAC to provide services to some of the millions of refugees who started trekking back home from India. BRAC took up the challenge in a remote northeastern region of Bangladesh, helping a large number of them to resettle. While doing so, it became clear to us that relief is not a permanent solution, for it creates dependency and inaction. We felt that there was a need to empower the poor directly so that they can take charge of their own development. It is thus that BRAC changed its approach from relief and rehabilitation to rural development and poverty eradication. BRAC addressed its program intervention on the landless poor, with women who were the least fortunate its prime focus. At the field level, BRAC created village organizations with 40 to 50 people, mostly women, and set about the task of bringing out their hidden potentials. To inculcate the spirit of self-reliance, it encouraged the members to save a small sum of money every week. To make group members socially aware and to build a sense of self-worth in them, participation in a process of conscientization and a legal literacy course was made a condition for group membership. Members became eligible to receive small loans, repayable in weekly installments. BRAC also provides training and support to the borrowers so that they can use the money in constructive and effective ways and repay the loans in regular weekly installments. So far, $1.8 billion has been disbursed to 3.65 million group members, 98% of whom are women. Their savings with BRAC now amount to $85 million. It will be an interest to you to know that 98% of the borrowers pay back their loans with service charge on time. These loans are taken for different income generating activities in agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, livestock, poultry, rural transport, trading, etc. BRAC has created marketing outlets for village artisans where their artifacts find ready markets. BRAC is also active in the area of public health, in which, in addition to helping its group members, it also works at the national level. As a matter of fact, in the 1980s, BRAC's female health workers led a national campaign on how to make homemade oral saline to prevent dehydration and death from diarrhea. It took us 10 years to cover 13 million households and were able to teach the method to at least one mother in each family. BRAC's health program also emphasizes the importance of clean water and good sanitation. It is also involved in carrying out immunization programs to protect children from deadly diseases such as tuberculosis, tetanus, diphtheria, whooping cough, poliomyelitis, and measles. In addition, there are also BRAC health centers that provide general health service to people who do not have access to other health facilities. Since mid-1980s, BRAC also decided to create facilities for education of poor children. BRAC therefore set up non-formal primary education schools for children between the age of 8 and 14. BRAC has 34,000 schools all over the country with 1.2 million children. About 70% of these students are girls. These children are either dropouts or they have never been to school. The school's attractive teaching methods and appropriate supervision have ensured a dropout rate of less than 5%. 2.4 million children have already graduated from, of whom 90% have transitioned on to high schools. The interesting teaching methods and styles practiced in our schools have generated widespread interest among academics in Bangladesh and abroad. And this model is being replicated in many developing nations in Africa and Asia. Today, BRAC touches 68 million people in 60,000 villages throughout the 64 districts of Bangladesh. Including the 34,000 teachers, the total number of employees at BRAC is 60,000. A number of donors from abroad have assisted BRAC since its inception. Each year, however, BRAC is becoming less donor dependent. It has set up a number of commercial ventures, such as the BRAC printers, the cold storage operation, BRAC Dairy and Food Project, along with the Arong Craft stores. And the profit from these projects are diverted to its poverty alleviation program. In 2002, the total annual expenditure of BRAC reached $166 billion US, and BRAC generated 82% of this from its own resources. Recently, BRAC has entered a new phase in its activity when it felt that with its Bangladesh experience in working in a war-ravaged country, it could be of some assistance in helping the people of Afghanistan. We have therefore launched a program in that country in the three important areas of microcredit, education, and healthcare. BRAC, which started modestly 3 decades ago, has now grown into a very large organization. And recognition such as this one by Gleitsman Foundation acts as a great encouragement to its many workers to excel in its endeavors. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Pretty inspirational. Jaya Arunachalam has devoted a quarter of a century to helping India's poor from helplessness and exploitation. She founded the Working Women's Forum in 1978, now helping 700,000 of the poorest of poor women in southern India take responsibility for their lives. She's also president of the National Union of Working Women, a grassroots trade union of poor working class women, as well as president of the Indian Cooperative Network for Women, an informal banking system designed to meet the needs of poor women. And I don't know how she does it, because it would seem that that would be enough, but she has now started an international grassroots network of women in developed as well as developing countries. It's a wonderful honor to be able to introduce to you Jaya Arunachalam.
Thank you, Mr. Gleitsman. And thanks everybody. As I stand before no. Thank you. As I stand before you in all humility, at the intellectual core of the world, facing a very highly enlightened community, to accept the International Activist Award of 2003, bestowed on me on behalf of the 700,000 women of the Working Women's Forum and myself. I express a deep sense of gratitude at the outset to the eminent jurists and the Board of Advisors of the Gleitsman Foundation, but above all to Alan Gleitsman himself and Cherry, and for having handpicked me for this award from India as the President of the Working Women's Forum. This great privilege and honor, appreciating our long-run battle against poverty, is indeed an extremely fulfilling moment and is symbolic of a deep commitment of the Foundation to a just and equitable world order. The history of the struggle of the Working Women's Forum is a saga of poor women's remarkable emergence to leadership from destitution. The path they traversed is a long and arduous one. The conflicts and obstacles they confronted. The war against poverty was not extraneous, but from within their homes, in their communities, markets, and streets. To establish their rights to their own entitlement was not an easy process. Despite being the most vulnerable and the poorest of the social groups, their empowerment process highlights the great learnings to tens and millions of women in similar conditions world over. India historically, no doubt, is a veritable storehouse of glorious past, and yet its current situation has to be judged by the scorching reality that 41% of its people still in poverty. The situation at the time when we initiated this movement was that even 30 years of India's independence in 1978, people were confronted by administrative failures on all fronts and also a vacuum of political leadership and role models. In brief, the country's management could not keep pace with the growing population and numbers of the poor. On one side, they serviced the social development agenda on the aspirations of the people. Abysmal conditions of higher number of people pushed into poverty resulted in the poor women and children bearing this burden, and a situation that clearly demanded for solutions. Thus, it is this socio-economic milieu of the Indian nation that warranted a different time and a new political activism to generate new responsible communities at the grassroots and leadership among the individuals for collective action. It was as if the second struggle for freedom was essential. That is, the first was during the colonial days, and the second one to elicit enormous participation and cooperation of the marginalized poor themselves to fight poverty through social innovations had become the major strategy. Working towards these dynamics, one had to mobilize the women at the grassroots politically into a mass movement, with a determination to integrate them into democratic process. The motivation has been twofold. One is to create individual activism and dynamism among the poor women themselves. Secondly, create mass awareness among the public. These strategies helped working WWF gradually build up a platform for the poor women, prepare them for a long-drawn struggle process at the outset to confront the obstacles to establish their rights and entitlements eventually. With this end in perspective, poor women as catalysts moved between the villages and urban slums of the city's quarter settlements where the poor lived and worked, creating a collective consciousness in them to fight anomalies of squalor, hunger, and to motivate them in large numbers for collective action where they're all fulfilling endeavors. The world cannot ignore the fact that the poorest communities, in all the poorest communities, the entire organization or the unit of a family is run from the income earned by the women and children alone. The male income is very low in the poorest families, not only due to large-scale male unemployment, but also as most men in poorer families are in the grips of alcoholism. Therefore, while choosing the right human resource potential in families, it was the fitness of things that the forum's strategy was concentrated on women as an entry point to social development. This was followed by a new initiative, the arduous task of building up institutions that were responsive to poor women. The critical struggle was to orient women to manage such institutions for their own development, their own communities, and their families. The Working Women's Forum, the Indian Cooperative Network for Women, and the National Union of Working Women were established with a massive membership of poor women. As majority of them were working women, contributing to family income, their access to credit became crucial at the outset to escape from the clutches of moneylenders, whose exploitation leads to their losing major profits from their enterprises. WWF's women members are mostly vendors, hawkers, silk weavers, lace artisans, cigar rollers, incense stick makers, agricultural laborers, etc. With credit in their hands, women not only had the bargaining power, but could become successful entrepreneurs, diversify their business, acquire land, housing, saving technologies. In the long run, also afford human resource investment of their children in educating the girls, particularly with access and control of assets and resources in communities. Women became de facto heads of the household in many families. The milestone in 25 years, the forum's existence was that the poor women in WWF had demonstrated to the world that they are bankable, can build up assets, handle resources, take part in sophisticated economic activities, build up institutions, and accumulate wealth. A testimony to this is the fact that 325,000 women, poor women, now participate in these banking activities, managing the bank and leading to profits with 98% return. They have actually distributed up to 79 crores, and then particularly they made savings up to 700,000 rupees. Further, to strengthen their productive roles, they promoted a cadre-based reproductive healthcare advocacy program, building up a network of advocates in their own rural and urban communities. These cadres hailed from their own class and were able to remarkably strengthen health consciousness of women and children both in the villages, in the squatter settlements of the city and in the shanty towns. To utilize the underused government's health facilities was also becoming possible. A further learning from these programs was female surgery is not the only means to population stabilization, but it is a crucial decision on the life choices for women based on selective contraceptive practices. Women in the forum established, through their lessons that the childbearing role of a woman to be perceived as a social role and not therefore they have the right to safe motherhood, to take care of their children, to enable decision-making process regarding the number of children and in using their contraceptive practices as a matter of their own life choice. The program impacted about 1,600,000 families in Tamil Nadu alone. Taking up leadership through political process in their own villages and city municipal wards, they fought for their representation as guaranteed by the 73rd and 74th Amendment of the Constitution of India in the village panchayat and urban local bodies of small towns. They never shrinked or failed to go on long marches to draw public attention, to create public opinion against atrocities and injustices against them for their demands, rights, or entitlements for better roads, electricity, water, sanitation, schools for their children, hospital facilities, and other public utility services. Friends, we have come to the last part of this particular speech. Currently, the irreversible globalization process everywhere in all the countries of the world affects almost all aspects of human activity. We in the forum feel that our focus on poverty reduction efforts has to be intensified with an apprehension lest our women who have come a long way in overcoming to a great extent from their poverty to be pushed back into the trap of poverty again. We shudder to think that our children would lose their right to normal childhood and become child laborers again. All these are tightrope walking for us. That is between the progressive path we have treaded so far and the conflicting situation we have to face in future on account of this new globalization process. Without preparing the large number of poor in the world and that are found both in India and South Asia and in the developing world to participate in the economic liberalization, mere imposition of globalization process is beginning to push them into the dark corners of the hunger and starvation again. Without building capacities of the poor or ensuring markets for their products or enhancing their purchasing power, a thrust of the globalization process will further divide the world inequitably into two parts, one for the poor and the other for the rich. I appeal to the enlightened intellectual community to do a fair amount of sensitization, consciousness raising towards this anomaly to all those concerned. Secondly, the consequences of war is yet another impediment and burden on the world's poor and vulnerable. This will visibly lead to the displacement and disruption of the poorer communities from their homes. The war might be a global war against terrorism, but one cannot ignore the fact that it affects innocent civilians, pushing the world's economy, particularly in the developing world, back by several steps, and the people and other people into persistent poverty. It infringes on the human right of peaceful communities and is a threat to human security, displacing more innocents out of their safe habitats to refugee camps. Moving once again back into the vicious circle of poverty has several severe consequences and is far more dangerous and disastrous. As a result, millions of poor, particularly the unemployed youth, will engage themselves not only in cross-border terrorism, also in their dire desperation will further be induced to illegal trade of smuggling of arms and drugs. I conclude, friends, by quoting Abraham Lincoln, malice to none and charity to all, a philosophy similar to the non-violent peace pursuit adopted by the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi in India. Mahatma Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King in your country. Though all of them have been victims of violence themselves, the philosophy preached in India from the ancient Vedas was that the world to live as one single family, describing it as Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, our world as one human family. The message of the Working Women's Forum's experience is similar to these ideologies. The world as a global village must move faster towards an equitable new social order to meet the demand of the marginalized to become the first among the equals. Once again, I may express my heartfelt gratitude to the Alan Gleitsman Foundation and to the distinguished audience before me, and thank you for the rare privilege of having chosen the Working Women's Forum and me for this honor. Thank you very much.
As we gather here this evening, it's very hard for many of us to realize what life is like in sub-Saharan Africa. From the beginning of time, without the tools that drives our society, preparing food and providing water for the family in rural Africa took every waking hour of the day. Working for various international organizations for more than 25 years, Roman Imboden has developed a revolutionary tool to confront this problem, the multifunctional platform. What is the multifunctional platform? This is an 8 horsepower diesel motor with several mechanical modules that has the potential to change the life on the continent. With it, women exhausted by the repetitive task of milling now can use it for 5 minutes to do a job that used to take an hour. It crushes, grinds, and shreds. It saws, drills, and welds. It pumps water and generates enough electricity to light an entire village. It can run on nuts and is changing the way of life in one of the poorest regions of the world. It's a special privilege to introduce the developer of this wonderful visionary device, Roman Imboden.
Thank you very much. So my English is not so fluent, so my speech will be very brief. First, I want to remercier, to thanks Mr. Gleitsman and his foundation. I don't not understand how they found me. But they come here. But I am very glad to be here and to accept this present in the name of all the people help me to do that. Well, I am not alone. You can imagine these small things is an ID that is very, on the technical side, that is very easy to do, but we do it with the village. We do it with the ID for the village, with the priority on the village. So the villagers. So the villagers has the property of this ID, and they involve, they accept that, and they develop this ID. So for this reason, it's not a technical advance, but is a thing was well adopted from the people. And this is the reason of the success of these things. After several years of the project, maybe 150 platform was installed by the project. But what is most interesting is that maybe 1,000 to 1,500 platform was installed without the project. They was installed while we start with the local entrepreneur, with the people. So this is a sign, this is the indicator that this ID was large spread. So you don't need any project anymore in order to increase the efficiency of the problem, of the machinery. But it's always starting without power from the outside. And this is the goal we reach. And this is very satisfactory for me and for my colleagues. So I will give another time many thanks for this hour. And I hope you understand.
We not only understand you, but hopefully others will emulate you. As we present our awards, I often wonder whether anyone will be inspired by the activist achievements to become activists on behalf of a cause meaningful to them. Perhaps something like that happened here at Harvard some 45 years ago when Roy Prosterman graduated from Harvard Law School. After a brief term at one of the nation's top law firms, he took a teaching post at the University of Washington and determined to confront the poverty and underdevelopment that he had seen firsthand in other places in the world. Using the law to help reshape the world, he developed a program of democratic land reform. Working in 37 countries, the Rural Development Institute, which he formed, has been instrumental in securing ownership or ownership-like rights to the land that they till for 120 million farm families. 120 million farm families. One way to look at that, in addition to what David said, 10% of the arable land in the world, if these 120 million farm families each consisted of only 5 people, certainly it was probably much more than that. Let's say it was only 5 people. That's 600 million people. That's 10% of the people that live on this planet. So 1 out of every 10 people that live on this planet is thankful to the work that's done by Roy Prosterman. And I would hope that perhaps there is a student here thinking that 45 years ago, Roy graduated from school here. And he didn't know what to do. He decided to work for a large law firm, I think in New York, for 6 years. But then he came to this position, and think how his life has been rewarding for him and for so many people in the world. And maybe you will also find the path that you want to take. In the meantime, please welcome Roy Prosterman, honoree of the 2003 International Activist Award.
I'm overwhelmed, not least because of the company that I am in with my co-honorees. I would like to thank the Gleitsman Foundation for their vision in creating an award that attempts to stimulate activism on the international plane, the Kennedy School, and of course my colleagues at the Rural Development Institute who do most of the work, of course. I am overwhelmed to find myself in the same company as my 3 co-honorees. The numbers that we've achieved sound large, but the leverage of the law has a built-in advantage that once you've done the groundwork and persuaded a government to move in a certain way on land tenure reform, large numbers are affected. But in terms of the arduousness of the work, the grassroots commitment, my 3 fellow honorees represent work that is incredibly more difficult. I'm overwhelmed to be here. This is one of the rare platforms where one can speak of the almost forgotten issue of land reform. The U.S. very successfully supported major land reforms after World War II in Japan and Taiwan and South Korea. I was too young to be involved in those. But in South Vietnam, the issue raised its head. In fact, at one point, I think correctly, President Thieu said if we had carried out land reform in the 50s, this horrible conflict would never have occurred. He was almost certainly right. I became involved and was able to draft a land of the tillers law that was adopted and implemented in 70 to 73, 10 years too late, but with 3 interesting results even at that date. 1 million families received ownership of land who had been sharecroppers. Rice production went up by 30% in the middle of the war. Indigenous Viet Cong recruitment, interestingly, went down by 80%, although by that time it was largely in form an interstatal war, and the land reform could not affect divisional combat or divisions coming down from the north, nor could it affect the, by then, very understandable war weariness here. And interestingly, field interviewing also showed a very decided shift in sentiment in the rural areas towards the the government. The last chapter of that involvement, interestingly, was that in the early 80s, seeing that the family farms of the South were drastically outproducing the collectivized farms of the North, the communist government decollectivized the whole country. And then they invited me back in '93 to see it and said, see, we've decided family farms are the way to go, far more productive, far more effective, and indeed their total grain production increased from 13 million tons in the late 70s to 31 million tons currently, making them a substantial exporter rather than an importer of grain. There are many countries in which the land issue is and remains a crucial one. We should not forget that 45% of the people on the planet still make their living from agriculture versus 2% in the United States. Nor should we forget that landlessness, that is the status of being a tenant farmer or agricultural laborer, is the best predictor of rural poverty in most settings where it exists. In India, for example, landlessness is a much better predictor of rural poverty than either illiteracy or caste. And there may be new approaches to land reform in places like India. For example, what we're finding in our most recent field work excuse me, is that families that have as little as a 10th or a 15th of an acre of land, and not even full-size farms of 1 or 2 or 3 acres, but the benefit curve goes up rather steeply. And on a 10th of an acre, an average family produces all the vegetables they need, most of the fruit they need, most of the dairy products, because they keep an average of 2 cows and shed and back, and produces a cash income of between 8,000 and 11,000 rupees a year, which is essentially the equivalent of what one full-time adult worker would work for in the field during a year. So it's the equivalent of adding a full-time laborer to the household. Also, since much or most of the work on the garden plots is done by the woman, she controls the income, and thus the incremental income is not used for beer or cigarettes or Coca-Cola or gambling. It's used to feed the children and improve basic medical care and sanitation. So there are new approaches. Also, I might add, even on a 10th of an acre, households constantly tell us, even if they're scheduled caste or scheduled tribe households who've been landless, now they have a 10th of an acre, they have status in the community, they communicate with many more groups within the community, they're often creditworthy, not moneylender creditworthy, but normal channel, reasonable interest creditworthy. There's another whole side of the land reform issue in the formerly centrally planned economies. We're working now in China, where they had decollectivized in the early 80s, but they had left people with what lawyers would call at-will rights, because the local cadre could take the land back at any time and redistribute it, new patterns in the name of demographic change. Now they've changed that. The new law provides, first a law passed in '98, now a much more detailed law, just effective, provides that farmers will get 30-year use rights, 1 generation use rights embodied in written contracts and fully transactable. They're at about the 40% point of implementation of that new law, which is about 85 million households out of the total of 210 million households in rural China. There are gender issues that are very important, vital that women receive at least equal rights to land, and wherever possible, especially with garden plots, it may be possible to provide sole title to the woman to increase her bargaining power and leverage and command over the resources. One final point, which is a little bit aside, but You know, there's a new Millennium Challenge account bill in Congress that has bipartisan support, but could easily languish because very few people know about it. The aim is to increase U.S. aid, which is woefully inadequate, by 50%, by $5 billion a year by 2006, moving step by step up to that point, and it's to be focused on precisely the poverty issues that the four of us have been talking about. It's the most important change in the foreign aid program potentially for 30 years, and the first time major new resources have been put in. Well, I'm reminded of an account in 1947. The Harvard marching band marched through Harvard Square in support of the Marshall Plan. Is it conceivable that the Harvard marching band will once more march in support of effective reform of foreign aid? I truly hope that will happen. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, one and all. I want to thank the students here who participated in the past few months and the selection process. Some of you here at the school volunteered your time and effort to help sort through the various candidates that you have clearly chosen well, and we would like to invite your participation in the future. I'd also like to thank the faculty who are here and who've support this and appeal to you, as I appeal to students, to think about the coming year. And when the awards, the honors will be directed toward reforms in education here in the United States. And so I think of Ron Heifetz, who's here, who's been working with school superintendents on leadership issues and has launched a major training program for school superintendents here. Some of the rest of you who are going to be, I think, so helpful to us. Marshall Gans, I'm sure, will have a few words to say. Susan Beaton may have a chance to actually get a word in edgewise about this. But I want to say to you that as I hear these comments tonight and watch these awards, I think for all of us here at the Kennedy School, it is it's a stimulus, it seems to me, Alan, to do just what I think your awards are trying to do, and that is to help us focus on what individuals can do as social activists, starting organizations, getting people organized, working among women, working among the poor, and that whole phenomenon is something we not only need to understand better through our research here at the school and through our case studies, but it is something we need to bring students more in contact with as individuals, understanding the power of one, and what individuals like this have accomplished. It's a remarkable story, and you provide not only instruction for us, but you provide inspiration, and we appreciate that. So as I think about what you have done and heard these stories of Fazle Abed and Jaya, I gotta get this right. I noticed that Alan paused very carefully over your name. Arunachalam. All right. Roman and both.
Just one final observation. Earlier today, David was taping video oral histories of the four honorees. And I was sitting back there listening. And it occurred to me something that I thought would be particularly important to the young people here who are soon to graduate from the Kennedy School. These four honorees are a little earlier or a little later than normal retirement age of business executives. And I was thinking, if these were four business executives about to retire or having just retired, what would they be thinking of their future? They'd be thinking of somehow redirecting, hopefully, or playing golf, or getting a cabin up at the lake, and retiring. But what do these people think of? These are people that have worked for 30 or 40 years to great effect, that have changed the world. And what were they thinking now? Were they burned out? Were they going to just go ahead and vegetate somewhere? No, every single one of them was looking ahead. Every single one of them was talking about what they hope to accomplish in the next 10 or 20 years. And I think that's something that might be good to think about when you're thinking about what to do. After all, almost all of them redirected their lives after starting in something else, and they found a calling here that was so important for the world and so important for themselves. And it's an exciting way to spend your life. So thank you for coming. I hope you